Hello, welcome to this video lesson. I'll be looking at A Christmas Carol and how to answer a question on the AQA syllabus, and the focus for the question is 19th century society. Another quick reminder as to the assessment objectives. As with a lot of the literature sections for AQA, the mark allocation is 30 and it's divided 12, 12 and 6, AO1, AO2 and AO3. AO4, the SPAG allocation is not for this question. This is on paper 1. It's for Shakespeare only, not for A Christmas Carol. Okay, so what does a question look like? Well, here's a typical question with the extracts contained. The two things I want to say about this are read the bits in bold first. Don't read the extract straight away. Read the bits in bold. The bold above the extract gives you the context for where this extract lies within the novel. So read the following extract from Stave 3, then answer the question that follows. In this extract, Scrooge is speaking to the ghost of Christmas present. So it tells you where this extract comes from in the story. Then underneath the extract is the actual question itself. Starting with his extract, how does Dickens present 19th century society? And then you have the two bullet points which are equally weighted. And I'll explore how you can tackle this question effectively. Okay, so these just sums up what I've just said. The focus for the question, 19th century society, everything you write about must reference that in some way, shape or form. Okay, so based on the examiner's reports and I've read and the examiner's courses I've gone on, it's important. You've got 52 minutes to answer this question. It's crucial that you do a plan. Every examiner's report I've read states that students who show evidence of planning routinely secure higher marks. So you're going to know the story extremely well at this point. So jot down what you know about 19th century society and how it's portrayed in A Christmas Carol. So here's a few bullet points I've jotted down. Dickens was acutely aware of the desperate living conditions for the majority of the population. He linked this to the Industrial Revolution, population migration and subsequent cramped and squalid living conditions. Note the fog and its presence early on in the story, but how it disappears as Scrooge changes. He didn't have any faith that the church or government were capable of solving the problem and perceived the new law and treadmill as unjust and harsh. He urges that we should all accept responsibility for each other. He makes political points about the treatment of the poor and the need for education. And based on his own experiences as a child growing up, where he had to witness his own father being imprisoned for debt, he kind of knows what he's talking about. Children, ignorance and want highlight how the most vulnerable in this society are most at risk. If society was judged on how it treats its children, then this society would be damned. Okay, back to the extract. And I've shown you here just for illustrative purposes, not so you can read my handwriting, which is a bit of a task, how you could analyse and attack each extract. I've highlighted and made notes. Okay, so you should do this in the exam. It will help to formulate your ideas and ensure that your the structure of your answer is the best it can possibly be. So based on those highlights, and if you've got the printout, then or pause the screen or look at the printout, get a clear copy of this extract yourself and highlight it yourself and annotate it. So based on my annotations, you can come up with some others. Here it's just a few. I've made some points. The extract opens with sibilant something strange, which sets a more sinister Gothic tone. Ascendetic list, an ascendetic list is a list that doesn't have and in it, so it's like a list of adjectives together, but there's no and. Describe the two children as wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. And it's a damning indictment on 19th century society. Children shouldn't be described in such a way. They're also described as wolfish, so animalistic and Gothic imagery. Children should be happy and carefree. These two are the opposite. Bleak future for them and for society unless it changes, which is the underlying message behind the whole story. More Gothic imagery used to reflect society, draped and hooded. Devils lurked. Draped and hooded could be, the Grim Reaper coming to claim its victims. Are there no prisons? Scrooge's own words used against him reflects how the higher classes viewed poverty as something of a crime. They are man's, implying that society is responsible for its children and its future. Repetition of no throughout reinforces the negative portrayal of 19th century society. There's quite a few points there that you can make. Okay, so Focusing on the actual question, 19th century, this is the key element of the question. The examiner will be looking at how you apply your knowledge of the novella along with your analytical skills to this specific question. This means that in every paragraph you'll be referencing how 19th century is presented, or at least you should be. Now, the question is divided into 2 bullet points. The first bullet point will always be based on the extract, and the second bullet point will be on the wider novel. Same on the other question, the Shakespeare section. The first bullet point on the extract, the second bullet point on the wider play. And I'll explore it. I'll kind of suggest a way of structuring your answer to make sure that you do this in a minute. Focus on the extract. You should identify pieces of evidence to support the points you wish to make. See back to the previous screen for examples of that. Then in the wider novel, you do something similar. Jot down initial ideas about how society is presented elsewhere. Again, I've done this earlier on. Now jot down some quotes you think you could use in relation to these. For example, I wear the chains I forged in life. A little revision test for you. Who said that and what was it about? Or his wealth is of no use to him. He didn't do any good with it. Who said that and what was it relating to? Or a wretched woman with an infant. Okay? How to structure your answer, which is the kind of crucial bit. There are 2 possible ways you can do this. The first is to write 4 detailed paragraphs, 2 from the extract and 2 from the wider play. This ensures that you're covering the question and you're writing your answer comprehensively enough to satisfy the examiners. The preferred approach is the second approach. Now, just pointing out, your teachers may have suggested a way to structure your answer to this, and you may like it, and that's absolutely fine. These are just 2 alternatives I'm putting forward. The second approach is my preferred one. It's where you'd write 3 detailed paragraphs. Instead of separating your analysis on the extract from the wider story, you combine the 2. So where you incorporate both, where you're making a point based on the extract, you can link it to elsewhere in the novella. Same on the Shakespeare, elsewhere in the play. Now, regardless of which approach you take, one thing is fundamental. You must structure each paragraph so that it contains specific elements the examiner will be looking for. Now, what I mean by this is your P2C. You guys may have PEAL or PEAQ as a mnemonic to remember. It doesn't matter, but so long as you've got your point, your evidence, your technique, your explanation, your reader response, and then your context. Context I've kind of separated a little bit because it's only worth 6 marks, so 20% of your overall mark. So it doesn't need to be included in every single point that you make. Now, the order in which you include these in the paragraph is irrelevant, so long as within each paragraph you can tick these boxes, and link to the question would be one that's possibly omitted from that. So let's use the language of the question in your answer. And a general summary of how to analyse, link, quote, explain, terminology, effect, and alternative meanings. Okay, you can pause the screen and have a look through that in a little bit more detail. Now, as well as planning your answer, the examiners also recommend that you write a little introduction, a brief introduction, just a sentence, maybe 2, where you set out your main ideas behind your response. Now, here's an example of one I've written for this question. Dickens was concerned with how unfair Victorian society was at this time, feeling that the poor majority were harshly treated by the wealthy and those in power. His belief was that as a society, everybody should take on more responsibility for those around them to ensure a fairer, more just society for all. Okay, so an example of an introduction to that question. Okay, my first point, and I've cut a bit of this off at the top there, apologies for that. My first point could look something like this, and I'm going to go through other points that you could write, but I'm only writing out the first one in full. The bits in black are the elements of the paragraph you need to include to allow the examiners to give you the top marks. In this extract, we see Dickens hammer home his warning that society needs to be a more caring place, that each individual has a responsibility for those around them. One measure of a society's worth is the fortunes of its children. One would expect children to be happy and carefree, not as they are described here in 2 asendetic lists of synonyms with negative connotations, as wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, no doubt shocking the reader with such vivid imagery. Remember, the narrator is describing children, a boy and a girl, also as wolfish, lending an animalistic quality to them, implying that the future is very bleak if this is the state of society's children. That they are called ignorance and want is a clear message from Dickens that a change is needed to a more compassionate, caring and fair society, for all paths will lead to doom. In his own childhood, Dickens experienced at first hand how harshly the poor are treated when his own father was thrown into prison for debt, and Dickens himself was often left without enough food to eat. Okay, so there's an example of an opening paragraph. Pause it, have a read through it in a bit more detail, nick whatever you want from there, or borrow the whole lot, or ignore it, like ignorance. Sorry, I'm joking. Okay, further points you could make, and I think I've got 3 more further points you could make. Okay, from the extract, ignorance and want symbolic of the ills in society, which is doomed unless it accepts responsibility for its actions. Scrooge's words also come back to haunt him as the ghost of Christmas present reminds him that he once asked, "Are there no prisons to house the poor?" implying that being poor is a crime. Here he sees the reality that the poor include vulnerable children who should be helped, not cast aside. Victorian society blamed the poor themselves for being poor, not the low wages they were paid. Link this to the Poor Law and Treadmill, and also Dickens' own work as a court reporter, which afforded him the opportunity to see just how harshly treated the poor were. Point 3 you can take from the wider novella. Earlier in the story, explore the contrast between Scrooge and his nephew Fred, who was full of the joys of Christmas goodwill, only to be met by a bar humbug from Scrooge. Also, Marley's ghost tells him there are so many people who need help, but it's too late for him, as he has to wear the chains I forged in life around him for eternity. And how much he'd like this second chance Scrooge now has to make amends and look after those around him. What impact does this have on Scrooge? Does it plant the seeds of change for him ahead of the 3 spirits? The final point you could make. Society's redemption is underway, highlighting that if Scrooge can change, anyone can. He laughed for the first time in years and it felt great, all because he started doing nice things for others. Money was no longer his selfish motivation, no longer his false god. He saw the error of his ways. He is now happy. The Cratchits are no longer suffering in poverty, and Tiny Tim does not die. This carries Dickens' key message that if we look out for each other, then we will all be far better off. Okay, so that's plenty for this question. Now, your task or your challenge is to approach every question in a similar way. By way of revision, you could start annotating other extracts without actually writing the answers. You could just annotate them, get used to that, and looking at kind of various techniques that are contained within specific extracts. Do a quick Google search online, you'll find plenty of exam style questions there. Or take this question and actually write this question out in full, and if you're a premium member you can submit your answer to me and I'll mark it and give it detailed guidance as to how you can get the top marks if it's not already a top mark answer. And finally, best of luck with your revision and see you on the other videos. Bye now.